So there's many people think that, and the reason is because the foundation of wara, taqwa, is halal. To become muttaqi, the whole point of spirituality or zuhud and, being pious is, if that's the point, if that's the goal, then you have to immediately deal with your finances. No, you are not late. I haven't even started yet. I was just talking just before we start. So, I'm just repeating something I said to Brother Ahmed, that if you're going to be a muttaqi, then your money has to be, like your clothes that you wear, that you pray namazis and do your extra nafils in, have to be halal. The food that you just ate has to be halal. So therefore your money has to be halal. So Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan, rahimahullah, and it's the first book written on that topic in history, Kitab al-Kasb. So it's quite an interesting work. So in our masjid dars, I'll be putting it on my YouTube channel, inshallah. Today's session was just introduction to the author and introduction to the book. Next week, we'll start the first section. And the first section is interesting. It talks about the professions, the earning of livelihood by Prophets alayhim salam. He said there's some ignorant people who think that earning livelihood is against tawakkul or taqwa. And he has some harsh words to say for those people. But anyway, let's get started, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu wa nasalli ala Rasulil Kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today we'll be about halfway through it will be exactly halfway through the book, inshallah. It's not a very long lesson, maybe about half an hour. There's only 3 slides. So we did Aam last week, now we're doing Khas. So if you revise Aam, studied Aam, then you'll know Khas is the opposite of Aam. Before that, we did Amr and Nahi, and before that, we did other definitions as well. So specific, I'll just grab the book. So I'll read from here first, from Shaykh Musa Ferber's translation, Imam Juwayni, Imam Al-Mahalli's commentary, inshallah, and then we'll read from the slide. It's the same, what's on the slide there, I'll read. So just notice the differences. Particular applicability is the opposite of universal applicability. All right. So it is said that which does not include 2 or more things without constraint. For example, 1 man, 2 men, and 3 men. Right. Particularization, takhsis, is the distinguishing part of the sentence. That is removing those who had a pact from his statement, fight the polytheists. Right? Takhsis comes from khas, right? The word particularization. Phrases for declaring something particular divided to connected, dependent clauses, which syntactically cannot stand on its own and are rather subordinate to phrases containing universal applicability. And disjointed, right? Translators note independent clauses which syntactically can stand on their own and are not subordinate to their phrases, containing universal applicability which they modify. Connected particularization includes exceptions. Its examples will come. Conditional, honor Banu Tamim if they come to you. Right? This is conditional. That is, honor those of them who come. Qualification using attribute. For example, honor the legists of Banu Tamim, the scholars of Banu Tamim. Right? So let's have a look at the slide, and we'll read that first, and then we'll go through it. So I'm just reading it again. It's a slightly different translation. It's good to read a different translation. It may be a different translator, maybe give you a different perspective and the language you might be more familiar with. This can be a little bit distracting because the words are not maybe day-to-day words. Specific is the opposite. So he uses the word specific, while Shaykh Musa Ferber uses particular applicability, right? So he says specific is the opposite of general, right? And he says the opposite of universal applicability. while there it says specific is the opposite of general. Specification is distinguished by part of the sentence. It is divided into dependent and, I'm going to explain this in a moment, dependent and independent clauses. The dependent clause can be an exception, a restriction to condition, and a restriction to characteristics. An exception is excluding what otherwise is be included in the statement. It is only sound on condition that something remains for which the exception is made and on condition that it is connected to the said statement. So, okay. So let's continue. Let's go to it. So firstly, khas or specific is the opposite of am, right? Remember the definition of am from last week includes two or more things so it encompasses, it's shamil, so shumuliya, encompasses all the members of that category, right? Of a jins, right? So you got two or more things, so it's encompassing. So it is a word that indicates to a meaning that is limited, khas, that is, right? So it is a word that indicates, or a sentence or expression that indicates to a meaning that is limited, whether by a specific number, like for example, the example given, give to Muhammad, give to Muhammad. Now, when you say give to Muhammad, right, what does it mean? It means to a specific person. So you made a khas, right? Like the example that was given last week, give to the students, right? So when he says give to the students, it means any students, right? So it includes a whole category of students. Or for example, give to 3 students, right? Now the number 3 is das takhsis. It specifies, right? It specifies and restricts what was am, right? What was am is now being restricted, right? Imagine there's a student named Muhammad among the students and say give to Muhammad. Now you have singled him out. By singling him out, making takhsis of it, specifying you've removed the universal applicability, as the translation says here, or the generalness of it, right? 3 students, again, it restricts it, right? It creates a subset. If you study maths, basic mathematics, so you got sets and subsets, so you're sort of like making a subset within the main group. Specific person or number, that's one way. These are 2 ways of doing khas. There is basically what you're doing is you're limiting the am to a few members of that am, right? In the case of students, give to 3 students, right? When you say that, you're excluding the 3. So you got the am students, and from that you're restricting it to 3. So you're making these 3 students khas of the am. So you're limiting an am. You're limiting an am to a few members of that category or that am, right? Is that understood? So what the definition of khas is, that how khas is the opposite to am? Allah make it clear, inshallah. Okay, alhamdulillah.
Yes.
So my computer is really slow and I don't know why. I haven't got that many programs running, maybe the stream. Because I can hear it's working overtime. I'm sure these are the programs running. Anyway. All right. So the next part is about muttasil or muttasil. And he says that specific is the opposite of general. Specification distinguished by part of the sentence. Right? So something in the sentence will give you a clue that there is an am and something has been distinguished, separate, tamyiz, ba'd al-jumla, right? And there's 2 types, dependent, independent. Muttasil literally means attached, right? Or detached. And he's translated as dependent, connected, or disjointed. Right? The dependent clause can be an exception, a restriction to condition, and a restriction to characteristics. So how are you going to make this takhsis, right? How are you going to make this takhsis? If you're going to do the first one, so takhsis by that is joined. So basically what you're doing now is explaining what happens when an am and a khas come together. You understand? The khas exists because there is an am. There was an am and you've now made a takhsis from that am. So what is the hukm when they come together, when you join them together, right? So what we do is we impose the am upon the khas, and we limit the individual, the afrad of the am, in what the khas says. So for example, a principal in a school says, akrim talaba, honor the students, right? Respect, give honor to the students. Then somewhere else, another next day he says, but do not honor except for do not honor the students who failed. So like on Monday, he says, honor the students. He give instruction to the teachers, honor the students. The next day he gives a separate instruction, not attached, it's detached, right? Two separate occasions. Do not honor the students who have failed. So what does the teacher do? The teacher takes one of them is an am, right? Honor the students, meaning the students, all students. The next day he's been given another instruction, which is what? And the am is being imposed, right? And on the khas, which is the failures, right? The students who fail. So this khas has two states. It comes together. It can come. So in this situation, this is detached, right? Or imagine if he was to say it in one sentence, in one time. He said, honor the students, except for the ones who failed. This is attached. It's part of it. One sentence, both the am and the khas are together. So the hukm of the am and the khas have come together in the same. So this is muttasil or attached. The other one, first one I gave is mufassal, is separated. And then he continues. He gives three types, right? Istithna, exception, right? In that example that we're given, honor the students except the ones who failed. Honor the students except the one who failed. This except, right? In Arabic, usually is the word illa or ghair, right? Honor the students illa except for the ones who failed. This is one way of putting the am and the khas together, that you are making by exception, you're making khas. All right, that's the first type. The second, the second one is the example given in the book, using a conditional sentence, right? If Banu Tamim, if they come to you, then honor Banu Tamim if they come to you, right? So now honoring the Banu Tamim is conditional on what? That they come to you, right? The third one is a restriction of characteristic. So akrim bani tamim fuqaha. The fuqaha, the legists or legalists, the fuqaha, the jurists, honor the jurists of Banu Tamim, right? So honor the Banu Tamim, it's jurists, right? It's like you making a characteristic, restricting. You're not saying all of Banu Tamim. You're saying the fuqaha of Banu Tamim. There's an am there, which is Banu Tamim. And you've restricted to a subcategory, right, of Banu Tamim. Okay? I hope that's clear. So these are three ways. Either you make it istisna by, you make the takhsis by istisna, exception, like illa or except, using the word except or ghair, or by shart, if they come, then honor them, like a condition, you put a conditional clause, or you do it by characteristic. The question. Okay, good. Yeah, it's going to get trickier. We just started. This is the easy part. All right. Istisna, now we're going to go through the explanation of istisna. An exception is excluding what would otherwise be included in the statement. It is only sound. An exception is excluding what would otherwise be included in the statement. It is only sound on condition that something remains, which the exception is made, and on the condition that is not connected to the statement. Right. So this one is a little bit. So, for example, if you say the group came, So I'll read from the book because it gives a much nicer explanation, the commentary. Accepting istithna, this is called exemption, is removing something that otherwise would have been included in the phrase. For example, the group came except Zaid, right? Right, that's clear. So that's one type of exception. Then exception is valid, all right? And here it says it is only sound. On the slide, the second sentence of the last paragraph, it is only sound, it's only correct. And here it says only valid, only with the condition that something remains of that which the exclusion made. For example, I owe him 10 dinars except 9, right? I owe him 10 dinars, right? Except 9. It would be if you were to say excluding 10, it would be invalid. So I owe him 10 except 10, right? Now this is a lahu, right? This is a meaningless sentence, right? But also the Shafi'i you can exempt majority as well, like 9 out of 10. I owe him 10 dinars except 9, right? Which is 1, right? But the Hanbali say, this is according to the Shafi'i school, because the commentator and the writer, Imam Juwayni and Imam Al-Jalal Al-Mahalli, they're both Shafi'is. The Hanbali say no, that this is also lahu, right? They say that to say 10 except 9 goes against the rules of Arabic. I'm asking you the question, what would be do you think, just based on your understanding, what do you think would be for an exemption when it comes to number would be acceptable? Like if you're speaking a sentence to somebody just logically, I'm just curious, like, yeah, very nice. Is that from yourself or you read it?
Can you please repeat your question?
You're real humbly from the heart, Ahmed. All right. Anybody else want to?
Can you please repeat your question?
What do you think would be the Hanbali based on Arab? So the argument, Dr. Mutlaq in his explanation said that according to the language of the Arabs, and this is what the Hanbalis will argue, there's a point. They said they don't accept this. It doesn't matter as long as it's not equal. Any number less than 10 in this example would be acceptable. So they gave the example, I owe him 10 dinars except 9. In the Shaafi, it's acceptable. The Hanbalis no. What do you think? Anybody else want to guess or to try? Someone already answered and they got it right. Right. So, no. So it'll be, according to the Hanbalis, it has to be half. Yeah, I mean, I'm not. You're not going to decide the madhab, right? If you guess, just checking. I'm curious what you think would be a potential answer. So in the Hanbali madhab, it has to be half or less. So for us, it wouldn't even. This definition for us is not that except a valid only with the condition that something remains from that which is being excluded. Something has to remain still. In their case, it doesn't matter what it is, even if it's 1 in the 10. So if you say except 9, that's acceptable for them. For us, the saying except 9 is problematic from the start, right? According to the rules of Arabic, it doesn't even sound right. Like that's a strange statement to make, right? According to the Hanbali madhab, it's an unusual way to speak. And this is almost like, so someone went to the Qadi, if he goes to a Shaafi Qadi, and he said, in a transaction, I said 10 except 7, right? 10 except 7, right? A Hanbali Qadi, what would the ruling be according to a Shafi Qadi? The Shafi Qadi would say that, yeah, you have to pay him 3. Like, let's say there's money owed, right? And in the agreement, they said 10 except 3, right? Then there's 3 owing. If he went to a Hanbali Qadi, as for the mother, if he judged according to the Hanbali mother, and the guy says 10 except 7, right? If he says, I owe you 10 except 7 in this deal, right? Then he has to pay 10, right? The 7 is irrelevant to the agreement, right? Okay, good. Yeah, I understand. I understood what you said. Yeah, so it's so if a Hanbali Qadi, if he goes to Hanbali Qadi, the Qadi say, no, you owe him 10. The except 7, it doesn't mean doesn't mean anything based on this rule. So do you understand? I'm based on this usul. All right. One of its conditions, it is only sound if the condition that something remains at which except made, and on condition that is connected to the statement. One of its conditions linked to the phrase. So it would not be valid if one were to say the legists, I'm not even sure that word is legists came, the fuqaha came, like the jurists came, right? The jurists came. And one day later said, except Zayd. Right? One day later said, except Zayd. Right? This will not be acceptable. It is permissible to put that which is excluded before, I think that's on the next. Just regarding what is mentioned there, the second condition is a shart, a conditional phrase. So the example is given that the people came, the honor Banu Tamim if they come to you, right? So this is a condition, takhsis, making something khas by conditional sentence. There are others than this as well. There's 2 other ones, ghaya, and there's another one as well. These are, but only 3 are mentioned here for this book. Honor Banu Tamim, if they come to you. If they come to you is not an istisna, it's not exemption, it's a condition, right? Honor, if they come to you, only on this condition, right? Like honor those of them who come. So a third one is just looking at the conditions. I think this is on the wrong slide. Just give me 1 second. So what I'll do is this is my notes on the, give me 1 second. Just grab these notes and check them in the right place. Okay. So it is possible, we'll read this inshallah. I'll just continue with the, so the second condition is that it has to be, what's mentioned here for, the second condition mentioned for istisna is that it has to be attached. And it has to be attached. So it said, accepting in this, I'm looking at this now. So if you look at page, what number is it? 25, 27, right? Istisna is removing something that otherwise would have been included by the phrase. Accepting a valid only when, with the condition something remains that which the exclusion is made. We did that. One of its conditions is that it be linked to the phrase. It can't be the next day. It is permissible to put that which is excluded before from which it is excluded. The order can be different, right? Except Zayd, no one stood. It is permissible to exclude from the same category jins as we mentioned above, and from other things. Example, the people came, excluding the donkeys. Conditionals. Let's get back to this. It is possible for an exception to be stated before that which is made. So the second condition has to be attached. There's an intention. There's some things that are not mentioned here. There are conditions, that for istisna. Now we're talking about in takhsis, we're talking about istisna. He's going into detail istisna. So page 27 of the book, there's details of istisna, exemption, right? Extra conditions. I went to conditions and I went to thing, but we need to finish exemption first. There's conditions here that for the exemption to be valid, right? You have to, something has to be left from it, right? And also that something has to remain from it, that it's said on the same day. You can put the exemption before in terms of the order, doesn't matter. It is permissible to exclude from the same category and from other things, which we'll go through in a moment, right? So these are the conditions. So I'll read it from here. It is possible for an exemption to be stated before that which is made, and it's possible for a category to be accept it from a different category. Conditions, so we won't go through conditions. Firstly, so there are some additional conditions, which is the niyyah. For exemption has to be made before the exemption, that which is exempted from, the thing they exempted from. So for example, all the students except Zaid, right? So give honor all the students. So the intention has to be there when that order is given and that exemption is made, right? There's another condition, which is that the istisna, it cannot be correct until it is verbalized, right? It is actually said, there's nutq of it. There's another condition, which is that it has to be from the same person. These are extra conditions for istisna. You cannot say one person said, honor all the students, and someone else says, except Zaid, right? It has to come from the same person for the istisna to be valid, right? Because then there's a doubt about whether this istisna actually is istisna, it's an exemption or not, right? Now, there's some masail here. Some questions. It's page 27 of this book. This is what I'm referring to. Correct. If it is, it's the exemption will not be valid. If it's not valid, then it's am. There is no exemption, right? If it's invalid, there's no exemption then. Correct. If it's invalid, that means there's no exemption. Then we are dealing with the am, right? There's another masala that differs from the Shafi'i. So one masala different from the Shafi'i is that when it comes to the number, that which is exempted from the am has to be less 50 a half or less, right? Has to be small, cannot be more, which according to us is considered laghu. It's meaningless sentence. The second rule in which the Hanbalis differ, that if you're exempting from other than the actual group, the category, this is not a valid a valid exemption. In the Shafi'is, it is. So if you say the people came excluding the donkeys, right? The people came, the people is one jins, the donkeys is another category, right? The donkeys are not from the category of human beings, right? So how can you, it is permissible to exclude, as the book says, because it's a Shafi'i book, right? Written by a Shafi'i Imam, commentated by Shafi'i Imam, rahmahullah, that they think. But the Hanbali said no. For the exemption to be valid, right, then it has to be from the same genus, from the same category. Is that understood? Like we're talking about exemptions here. We are talking about khas, takhsis. In takhsis, the first type of takhsis is exemption. In exemption, there are certain, for it to be valid, has to be certain conditions, right? One of those conditions that the Hanbalis differ on, we discussed earlier, is in number. Like for us, that which is exempted, that which exempts is half or less. The other point of contention between the Hanbali Shafis, the Hanbali say that the categories of both, the thing that is exempting from the exempted from the am has to be from the same type, same jins, same genus. It cannot be something else. So for us, it would not be the people came excluding donkeys. This is not a valid istisna because donkeys are not from the category of people, right? That's a good question. how do we how was he how do we interpret this? The angels prostrated to Adam alayhi salam except Iblis, right? Except Iblis, since I heard that Iblis is an angel, yeah, so yet he was exempt. That's a big tafsir discussion. And was he from the category of malaika at that time? Was the address made to him separately? There's a whole discussion about that. So obviously, your shaitan that cannot use Usul Fiqh 101 Waraqaat to get out of making sajda. Obviously, he was in trouble. So the hukm was directed towards him as well. And our understanding was that there's no takhsis of Iblis from the hukm anyway. But that's a very good thing in terms of, I think that we're talking about ahkam. When you're talking about usul fiqh, we're talking about ahkam, rulings. Although there's an overlap with the normal language used elsewhere. So I think as a category, they were ordered together, but he was the one that did not make sense. But there's no hukm here per se. Like there's no hukm. The hukm was given to both of them, the malaika and the iblis. That's why he's in trouble, because he refused to make like we are told to pray and the angels are told to pray. That doesn't exclude him from the hukm. He excluded himself, right? He made takhsis. Shaitan made takhsis for himself. And he gave his illah under a reasoning as well. I'm created from fire, he's created from clay. But a good point, like in terms of just discussion, it's an interesting point. So there has to be of the same jins. So there is like 6 conditions you can say. So for istisna, for conditions, there are 6. The words have to be attached. If it's a number, then it has to be half or less. The mutakallim, the speaker, has to be 1. There has to be niyyah. It has to be spoken, articulated, spoken. It has to be from the same jins, right? Of the mustastamino, the thing that is exempted from. So these are 6 conditions that has to be there in the istisna. And so the 2 masail that differs from the Shafi'i here is that they don't have the half rule. They said as long as it's not equal to it, which according to everybody is a lahu, and it's not, and it can be from a different jins as well. The second type of takhsis is via shart, right? Honor the students except for honor the students when they pass, right? So this when they pass is a condition now. This is not exemption. This is a condition, shart, right? So this is a conditional clause that's been added to it, right? When they pass, right? Or you can put it the other way around. The order doesn't matter, right? You can put it, so they gave the example, I think here, I think mentioned previously, except Zaid, no one stood. Or for example, when if they pass, honor the students, right? So you can put the condition before, the order doesn't matter, right? That which is restricted to a characteristic is given the same interpretation as if it were unqualified, such as a slave characterized by faith in some places, unqualified in other places. The unqualified is interpreted as though it were qualified by the characteristic. Okay, so this is something that actually sort of deserved. Imam Juwayni rahimahullah has put this under the chapter of khas. But in many other books, and generally this is actually a chapter in itself and treated separately as opposed to under khas. Mutlaq and muqayyad, right? Shaykh, I'll read Shaykh Musa Ferbers. When something is qualified by an attribute, the unqualified is interpreted as being similarly qualified, such as a slave qualified by belief in some places. example concerning expiation for murder, and unqualified in others, for example, concerning the expiation for likening one's wife to his mother, al-zihar. Thus, the unqualified is interpreted as agreeing with the qualified as a precautionary measure. Now, what this is referring to, there's a different word that is used, and sometimes these words like am and khas can sort of be confused with muqayyid and mutlaq. And it's good that maybe we deal with it here so we understand it. Mutlaq and muqayyid can be called restricted. Muqayyid, in Urdu, if you qaid, like qaid, like something is restricted, qaid lagana, like put a qaid on something. In Arabic, it's an Arabic word. So muqayyid is a thing that is a qaid on it, there's a restriction on it. So restricted and unrestricted. Mutlaq is unrestricted. Mutlaq is unrestricted, and muqayyid is restricted, right? So, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to, and I'll explain the difference in a moment, what the difference between this and Aam is. Mutlaq, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Bani Israel, Musa alayhi salam tells the Bani Israel, as word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that slaughter a baqarah, right? From the general category of baqarah, any baqarah you pick out of that, there's no restriction on which member of baqarah that you'll pick, right? Which cow you slaughter is irrelevant, right? That's what, like mutlaq, you'd be given free reign to pick from any member of the the general category of baqarah, pick any old cow, any old baqarah will do, pick that. But Israel, what were they doing? They kept on doing takhsis, they kept on trying to make it khas, right? Without specification of a specific number. And you can see, in Urdu, for those who speak Urdu or any of the other Islamic Muslim languages, that these words khas, these are there in the normal lexicon of the language. So it makes it easy for people that are from maybe like Muslim background, languages that are influenced by Arabic. It makes it much easier to understand these concepts, because the words khas and am, for example, they exist in Urdu and Farsi, etc. Mutlaq, any cow from the category from the am or baqarah will do, without specifying which baqarah from the am, right? And so the definition, sorry, this went too far. I'm on the wrong slide. No, right slide. Too far ahead. So Am is inclusive of all the members, right? While Mutlaq, for example, honor the students means every student, right? If you say honor a student, this is Mutlaq. If you say honor the students, means honor all the students. If you say honor a student, this is what Mutlaq is. Do you understand the difference? So what is meant is one student or one baqarah in the ayat of the Quran, but not a specific student. So any member, this is different to khas, right? Khas is a specific student, right? Or specific students or a subset of that, right? Like, for example, they're distinguished by a condition, or they're distinguished by a characteristic, or they're distinguished by something else, right? So, right, the commonality, the generality that we're talking about in Am is shumuli. The word in Arabic, it's shamil, like in Urdu say shamil. So, like, it's inclusive of all the members. Am, the commonality, the generality of Am is to do with every member of that category, like every person of that category, of that genus. Like example given was student. Honor the student means all the students, right? While the commonality of mutlaq, the word mutlaq, or this categorization, is another categorization, right, of words, means a member. This is called umum badali. This is a generality, right, of a specific, badali, meaning take a member of this category, right? Any member without restriction. That you can take one member, like, for example, honor a student. Honor a student could mean it's mutlaq, right? It's unrestricted from this category of students, which is Am, right? There's a category Am of students. All honor the students, all the students. But when you say honor a student, this student, or this student, or this student, or this student, as long as you do one, because it's mutlaq, right? It's not restricted. So then you can pick this student, and the student is not specified. So as long as you honor a student, you fulfill this hukm. So someone gives you an order. A teacher says, give this gift to a student. The principal says to the teacher, give this gift to a student. It doesn't tell you which student, right? So then you have the whole arm. If you were to give it to student A, this hukm will be fulfilled, this order will be fulfilled. If you gave it to student B from that general body of student, the hukm will still be the same hukm will be full if he's on the second, because he's a student, he's a student, he's a student, he's a student, and on and on and on. All right. So this is what thing. And muqayyad is something that takes the mutlaq either by characteristic, by a sifa, or a shart. It takes it out of mutlaq. Right? It takes it out of the mutlaq. So let's have a look at some examples of that. No, that's just an example, right? It's not one student, but it's not, yeah, exactly. So you can say, like it's a sub category. In the example that I gave was one student. We'll go through examples. You'll understand the three cases, inshallah. Correct. Yeah, it could be three students, right? It could not necessarily one student. It could be three students, but it's any three students from that whole category of students. Like if the principal says honor three students, right? So now you got three students that you honor, but doesn't specify which students. You can choose any all three students. So this is now. So in terms of selecting them as students, it'll be mutlaq, right? In terms of from the category. All right. So like the hukm of remember that am will be imposed on khas. Similarly, muqayyad, mutlaq is imposed on muqayyad. So let's have a look at the cases. So there are two things in a hukm. One is the reason for the hukm. So when can you do this when it comes to ayat al-Quran? When muqayyad and mutlaq, they come together, they clash, you could say, or they come together in the hukm, then when do they come together, right? Let's have a read from the book. This is the last slide for today. It is possible for the book, it is possible for the book to specify, so this is not it, sorry, astaghfirullah. Last. That which is restricted to a characteristic is given the same interpretation if it were unqualified, such as a slave character. I'm sorry, this already. And then just getting to the notes again, my notes here. So there are like four conditions. There's a sabab, and then there's a hukm. There's a reason for the hukm, and then there's a judgment or a ruling at the end. So for example, the hukm of two, you're getting one that is mutlaq and one is muqayyid. You're getting two from the Quran, right? As an example, you're getting two different hukms. One is mutlaq, unrestricted, and one is, for example, وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِي أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ, right? So this is the ayat in Surah Nisa 23 regarding who's your mahram, right? And the mothers who gave you milk, right? The mothers that gave you milk, but it doesn't mention here, it's mutlaq because it doesn't mention in rada'a, in breastfeeding, in giving milk, it doesn't mention how many, right? So do you understand? And in a hadith, it mentions, I think it mentions 10. So if I remember correctly, I'll just check the hadith because I can't remember Aisha radiallahu anha's hadith. Just give me a moment. Just let me have a quick look. Um, just trying to find I'm sure it was 10. Like how many times as the wet nurse or the that lady would have to. Okay, here. Ashara da'at, yeah, that's right. All right. Ashara da'at. So 10 times she gives milk to the baby. Then she's established as the so is the hukm in the hadith the same? Right? Is it talking about the same thing? Yes, it's talking about tahrim. Is the sabab the same? Yes, rada'a. You understand? So the hukm is the same, which is that tahrim of this lady is now mahram. He's mahram, the person, let's say it's a boy, he's mahram to this lady now. You understand? And a relationship is established between them through breastfeeding, right? So the hadith is talking about the same thing. Aisha's narration is talking about the same thing as the ayat of Quran, which is breastfeeding. The sabab is the same, right? The hukam, both are establishing. This is ijma', there's consensus on this. If the sabab is the same, right? In a mutlaq and muqayyid, that's what we're talking about here. The qualified, unqualified, the restricted, unrestricted. If they're both talking about the sabab is the same, breastfeeding in this case, right? And the hukam is the same, tahrim, right? Of in terms of establishing a relation, then this by ijma' they can be put together. Hukam can be is applicable, is transferable, right? It's fine. We're talking about the same thing here. If the hukam and sabab both differ, right? For example, the thief, the thief says his hand should be cut. Now the word yad is used in the Quran, right? But the word yad, right, in Arabic has different meaning. Yad means this, and yad could mean this, because we know the word yad for cutting the hands is understood to be here, and the yad for wudu, إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وأيديكم, right? Wash your arms wash your hands. Yad is also called yad up to here. Wash your yad till your elbow, right? So the hukam and the sabab are both different, right? The hukam is different. One is talking about had, cutting the punishment, the hand of a thief, and the other one's talking about wudu, right? So the sabab, one is talking about tahara, and one is talking about had, punishment, right? So they are different, therefore you cannot transfer the hukam from one across the other. If the hukam is the same, but the sabab is different. So for example, like according to the Hanbalis and the Jamhur, majority of the scholars, if the hukam is the same, but the sabab is different, right? So in the book, he gives this example. Like the slave, like when something's qualified by an attribute, the unqualified is interpreted as being similarly qualified, such as a slave qualified. So you should tahrir raqaba, freeing a slave. Some ayat of Quran mention that tahrir raqaba, that to free a believing slave, right? So if you're, for example, in expiation of murder, like the kafara of accidental murder, the expiation, the kafara for that is, one of the kafara is to free a believing slave, and unqualified in others. For example, it's a mutlaq in other places concerning expiation for likening one's wife to someone does zihar, right? In Surah Qad Sami'a, the third last juz, in the third last, Qad Sami'a is the third last juz, the beginning of that first page of that whole incident is mentioned there. And one of the ways to deal with that type of divorce, which is divorce from Jahiliyyah, where a person says to his wife, her back is like his mother. One of the ways to get out of that, the penalty for that, or the kafara for that, the expiation for that, is so there it's unrestricted. It doesn't mention if it's a believing slave. It's mutlaq. There's no muqayyid, right? There's no restriction of being a mu'min, right? Thus the unqualified is interpreted as agreeing with the qualified as a precautionary measure, like ihtiyatan, right? So according to the Hanbalis and the majority of scholars, including Shafi'is as well, since the hukm is the same, even though the sabab is different, right? Then he mentions ihtiyatan, that one would the hukm would this mutlaq and muqayyid can be because we're talking about kafara here. Even though one is dealing with a different situation, the other one's different situation, it's fine. If the sabab is the same but hukm is different. So, for example, tayammum, it says by hands, and it's used the word yad, and wudu is until elbows, right? Both are for rafa hadas, right? The reason is the same, but the hukm is different. One is a hukm of what? Washing. The other one has a hukm of masah. So one is ghasl while the other one is masah. Then you cannot put this muqayyid and mutlaq cannot be joined together, right? So it can apply in two cases, but not it doesn't apply in two cases. I hope that's clear, inshallah, about muqayyid and mutlaq. It's a little side. We've just taken a detour a little bit from the main topic, which is khas. But this is also helpful as well because it helps you by putting it here. Then you can distinguish at least with mutlaq and muqayyid. This is a side discussion. It should have its own chapter. Generally, in other books, it has its own chapter. But it's good in a way. Allah reward Imam Juwayni, rahmullah, for putting it here because then it's sort of you have to deal with it, and then you don't go too far ahead away from khas. You can distinguish between am and khas and muqayyid and mutlaq and muqayyid, inshallah. Any questions about that? Mutlaq and muqayyid on the little detour that we took?
So the first point, like where they give this ayah of Surah Baqarah, can you please, the number 1 on page 28?
No? Okay. All right, next, last slide. This is the last slide. It is impossible for the book, the Quran. So now we're back to khas, right? It is possible for the book, the Quran, to be specified by the book, for the book to be specified by the sunnah, and for the sunnah to be specified by the book, for the sunnah to be specified by the sunnah, and for statements to be specified by analogy, right? What we mean by statements are the sayings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we're going to go through that. And Imam Al-Mahalli has given a nice commentary of this. It is possible, and I'll read this here as well, it is possible to be rendered particular by the Quran. Example, do not marry idolatrous women, which is restricted and by the virtuous women, those who received the book before you, are lawful for you, right? The one verse of Quran can make takhsis of another verse of the Quran. Do not marry mushrikat, right? And then here, when and marry the virtuous woman, right? The not any Christians or people of the book, but the virtues, the good of those who received the book before you are lawful for you. The Quran, and sometimes, like I was thinking this the last 2 weeks, if you think about it, Sahaba radiallahu anhum married, and Allah allowed it, to marry the Ahli Kitab in that time, right? I'm not sure how long Muslims practice this, but these are people that are still carrying they're not the Christians of today. Some of you might live in Christian majority, quote unquote, Christian majority countries, Western countries. The reality is the majority is not really Christian or practicing Christian, right? So the ayat of Quran is clear. You can marry the virtuous, but the virtuous, I wonder about this, that is it Sahaba radiallahu anhu was such a force of Iman that even when they went to places like Sham and Egypt and they married a Christian, which happens, part of history, and they are married in a house where the lady is Christian, technically not Muslim, right? And maybe hold beliefs that are contrary to Islam. But is it allowed that they were that it was an inevitable fact that they're going to become Muslim eventually? Just imagine, like the best people of this ummah, the greatest awliya, ulama, are the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. They're the best people after the Anbiya alayhi salam. Them being in the house, right? So this is not like, so the ayat of Quran gives indication to what type of person, even if they're non-Muslim, but it's not any old non-Muslim, right? So there's some qaid that is being put there, right? The Quran may be to be rendered Yeah, so the general meaning, like the arm is do not marry any mushrikat, and then exemption is there. Like this is the exemption afterwards. Like the exemption is coming, which makes takhsis, right? Wallahu alam. The Quran to be rendered particular by the Sunnah. Can ayat al-Quran restrict? I'm just looking at other examples. So there's the other ayat al-Quran. وَالْمُطَلَقَاتِ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَ قُرُوءٍ. Divorced women shall keep themselves waiting for 3 periods, like 3 menstrual cycles, right? And then there's another ayat al-Quran. As for those having pregnancy, وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ أَنْ يَدَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. As for those having pregnancy, their term of iddah is that they give birth to their child, right? So this is ayat al-Quran. And he said that this ayat, it says that mushrikat, al-mushrikat, because alif lam is there, it means all mushrikat. And the second ayat makes takhsis. With sunnah, there's ikhtilaf, right? There's a lot of ikhtilaf in this one. But the jamhur and the author of this book is Shafi'i, Imam Juwayni, Imam Ali al-Shafi'i. Majority of the scholars have viewed that you can do takhsis of ayat Quran with a hadith. There are objections raised by some imams, right? This is not that there is no objection to this. That can something, and their thing is that the lower thing, like obviously the book of Allah, the kalam of Allah, is higher than the sunnah. Can a lower thing, which is the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can that do takhsis of the book of Allah, the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? However, ulama have argued this, and the sahih and the correct view is that no, the sunnah was sent to clarify the Quran. The whole purpose of the sunnah, one of the primary, the sunnah is a primary source in itself, number one, right? It's a source of Islam and Sharia in itself. And also it is a clarification of the Quran. So if the point of the sunnah is there to elaborate, explain, expound on the Quran, then why would you put the restriction that the sunnah can't do takhsis on the ayat of Quran, right? Cannot restrict a meaning of the Quran from the sunnah. So in the Quran, it mentions about all the different. Correct, yeah. The Malikis I believe the Malikis have that. Cat, yeah. Keep your cats safe. Keep your cats away from the Malikis, I guess. I don't know. It's a strange example to give, but yeah, they all right. Yeah, so if I was just reading the comment, if I remember correctly, the Maliki said the Quran cannot be exempted by the Sunnah, or cannot be rendered, I think he mentioned here, or specified by the Sunnah, restricted by the Sunnah, or made khas by the Sunnah, which is why they do not consider eating cats haram but makruh, since the Quran already specified the forbidden foods, right? Because if Quran says this is haram, and then from Sunnah you say that is also using the Sunnah now to add or expand the meaning of what is haram, right? And restricting what is, so they are more open on and it's not just cats, it's many other things as well. I think dogs as well, and they don't consider, as far as I understand, they don't consider haram or makruh. Pretty much a lot of things are makruh, simple makruh. But I had a Maliki teacher in madrasa. He said that it doesn't mean that they eat everything. There's still Muslims, and there's an actual thing of not eating that which is not suitable to eat, right? Also, so for example, in marriage, so that you're allowed to marry, so it gives general, like anything other than what's mentioned in the Quran. But we know from the Sunnah, Rasulullah forbid, right? An auntie and a niece being in nikah of one person, right? And the fuqaha have explained why, like an auntie and a niece, her niece, right? There's an auntie and her niece cannot be married, it's haram. Like two sisters cannot be in the same nikah to one man, right? And the reason given of fuqaha is that between it could break down the family relation between them, right? Between this is reading a book many years ago that, if I remember correctly. But anyway, it is forbidden. That relationship is forbidden for one man to marry to the auntie and the niece, right? Even though it's not mentioned in the ayah, right? So, and he mentioned here sunnah, particular by the Quran, right? And this is number 3 in the book, the sunnah to be rendered particular by the Quran, right? So the Quran does takhsis of a hadith. This is the most ikhtilaf is in this, right? So for example, the God does not accept the prayers from any of you when they lose ritual purity until they make ablution, being excluded by, and if you will be ill and you find not water, then take clean earth. Even if the sunnah also mentioned dry ablution after the verse was revealed. Another example was given was so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the maita, the carrion, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that which is separated from the maita, right? Just trying to remember the hadith about, right? That which is separated from the maita. Maita is an animal. Like in Australia here, if you're driving down the road, the highway here, today like we saw like maybe 4 or 5 kangaroos. That's called maita. It's hit by a car, it died on the side of the road. It's an animal that's died, right? So the maita is forbidden. Where's the clarification of what's permitted from that? Where's the exemption from that, right? That everything that separates from the animal is not clean. But then in the Quran itself, in this takhsis, وَمِنْ أَصْوَاتِهَا وَبَارِهَا وَشْعَارِهَا, right, and so forth. So, and out of their wool and their fur and their hair, and like, right, these are things that, so the hadith is actually, takhsis is made of a hadith by the ayat of Quran, right? Yeah, so that's a good point. Regarding what previously mentioned about the Malikis, their understanding of makruh is not so, they don't take makruh things very lightly. Yeah, I remember my teacher telling me that as well. But anyway, number 5, this is the last one for today. We'll finish here, inshallah. Qiyas, analogy, right? Analogy is used. For example, az-zaniyatu waz-zani, fajlidu kullu wahid minhuma mi'atu jalda. So a adulterer and adulteress, or someone that is done zina, a male, the female and the male, they should be whipped 100 jalda, right? 100 strikes of the whip. And the female slave, right? If she's given 50, half of that. Like the slave woman that is a virgin and she does zina, then she's given 50, right? Half, which is in the Quran. فَعَلَيْهِنَّ نِصْفَ مَا عَلَى الْمُحْصَنَاتِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ, right? So she's given, so once they have been bound in marriage, then if they commit a shameful act, they shall be liable half the punishment prescribed for the free woman, right? But the male slave is also 50. But there's no mention in the Quran, right? There's no mention in the Quran, right, of the male slave. And he also, this is taken by an analogy, right? It's extended to the male slave as well, right? So the ayat of Surah Nisa makes takhsis of the ayat of Surah An-Nur, right? But for the male slave, because it's not mentioned there, it's done via qiyas. It's done by analogy, right? Qiyas, of course, is that 2 things are there and you find the underlying illah in both of them, then you extend the ruling of one to the other. There's conditions and a whole procedure around it because you're extending the ruling. For example, there's an alcohol that never existed at the time of Rasulullah. We never knew the name of it, but the underlying reason is intoxication. Wine has intoxication. Wine is haram. The hukm of hurma extends to, like, let's say vodka or some other new wine or Kwazu. There's all these different alcohols people come up with, sadly. And some new alcohol is made. And so now the hukm of this extends. Why? Because the underlying reason for both is intoxication. So the hukm, as the illah is the same underlying, the hukm also extends. So that's what, in brief, that's what qiyas is. And so therefore the qiyas here, qiyas is made on the old slave and extended to the male slave, although not mentioned in the Quran. Just one last note, Dr. Mutlaq, at the end of his lesson, he mentioned that some people do takhsis by using, quote unquote, the maqasid al-sharia. And this is a slippery slope, and this is extremely dangerous, and only senior ulama of the highest caliber who are very grounded in the madahib of the Ahl Sunnah, these madahib, they should look at these things. It's not open to everybody and so forth. People who say that use the maqasid, the goals of the sharia, right? The purpose of the sharia and maslaha, look at the common good. And then based on that, we're going to tell people that look at everything in sharia and then restrict, right? Or open up ahkam, right? And incorporate basically the modern situations. The problem with this is that those who are not, the level of rasikhun of ilm don't exist today. We have great ulama, pious ulama as well. But even those ulama that are pious, ulama rabbaniyun today, right? They are so cautious, moving like any shape or form, moving away from the well-trodden path of the fuqaha of the last 400 years, that these new sort of, some would even call it a fitna in our time as well, that in the last 100 years, he at the end, he said this, people are making their own takhsis up, right? They've added this new takhsis up that we do it on maqasid, and then we'll restrict or open up a ruling that is there, add a new spin to it, right? And it occurs in this chapter of khas and am, of khas takhsis, that is used, right? And they have their arguments, but there's no due process like the average person doing it, and they are doing takhsis of a hukm of Allah. No, that hukm applied for that situation. It doesn't apply today, right? That was for those conditions, right? That was for Arabia, for that. So they're restricting the hukm to a time, place, conditions, but basically what they do is they remove that hukm from society today, that it's not applicable today because it's changed like that, right? So it will not be applicable. So this is takhsis is used. This is one of the tools of the usuliyin is used to actually damage. And if this is opened up, unrestricted, this is mutlaq, right? It's made like every little scholar, every student in Islamic university or a madrasa starts doing this. The Sharia, we can pack and go home, and the Sharia will be out the window. Especially with the lack of taqwa, lack of knowledge and depth of knowledge. Many big scholars have slipped up in this matter in the recent era. I won't mention any names. You probably know them, but some of them. But they've slipped up on this matter because they are trying to use maqasid al-sharia, and this is heavily criticized by the traditionalists, that maqasid al-sharia, the goals of sharia, as a defining tool, and basically the net result is they've taken the sword to the whole sharia, right? Like what classic example is like Rasul forbid a male to put hand in the hand of a mahram, non-mahram lady, right? And this hadith, clear-cut hadith on this. Someone comes today and says that this is going to make the lady feel bad, and Islam is not against making feel bad. Therefore, it's it's okay. Directly against nas. Or, for example, there was another one about divorces. Someone divorced their wife so many times, like again and again and again. And someone will say Islam is a religion of love and peace and family, and because that's the goal of Sharia, right? It wants the best for humanity and human beings. That's right, right? It's like now, like we have to change the Sharia to suit that specific family's circumstances, situation, right? That's not how it works, right? Someone came to my father, rahimahullah, and he wanted to say he did something wrong. And in Islam, it's allowed, but in Australian law, it's illegal, right? I won't mention the specifics, And he came to my father. He said, can you write a letter basically to the authorities, to the judge, that Islam is allowed? I misunderstood. But the thing is wrong. The way he did the thing is wrong as well, right? And my father said to him that, where was Islam when you were doing this thing wrongfully in the first place? Now you want Islam to come and save you in the court? Like you went about, someone came, brought a girl in front of my father, and he said, I'm a very pious Muslim. And, he brought a girl like somebody else's daughter and said, oh, can you do my nikah? My father said, rahmullah, he said, my father's an alim, rahmullah, in the Imam al-Masjid. He goes, how pious can you be? He upset him. He goes, how pious could you be that you bring somebody else's daughter by yourself to the masjid? But anyway, rahmullah ta'ala. All right, inshallah, any questions? We'll wrap up, inshallah. Yes.
So, when you were talking about alcohol, these days, like in everywhere, like if you look, vape is so common. So it's basically haram. So is it true that it's haram? People are taking it so light.
Yeah, I mean, you gave a case of wudu and using qiyas for inferring by qiyas. MashaAllah, barakah, jazakallah khair for that thing. And you can see his honesty. And he feels that the other view is stronger. And he puts a caveat. Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahmahullah did the same thing as well. If you notice in the way he discusses, like he will always uphold the primacy of the school. Like he will not dismantle the school. There are other people dismantle the school. And that is a treachery on students, unfortunately, tulab al-ilm, seekers of knowledge. But the big ones, even if they hold a different view, they would mashallah barik alayhi, they would maintain the primacy of the madhab and keep the madhab intact. Because once you start tearing it down and mixing it all up, then we know what happens. And what type of scholars or people or next generation of scholars, they're all over the place and they're going all direction. There's no structure. You lose cohesion. You lose structure, right? So if everybody just did the things that they wanted to do. But these ulama, that senior ulama, even if they followed a view and they looked at a thing deeply and this is what I mentioned at the start. For the average person, their imam is their local, their imam is their madhab is the imam of the masjid. For the talib al-ilm, he should stay within the mazhab madrasa. He's studying a systematic structure. He's going to take on the structure of the whole of Sharia, study it in deeply and analyze everything and step by step in a structured way, and spend decades of his life. Then he should go in a systematic way, as has been done, the well-trodden path. And then the third level is when he reaches the pinnacles of knowledge. And he, by research and tahqiq, right? This is tayammum and wudu is a very small masala in what you've mentioned, right? We're talking about people talking about things that are haram and halal, like major things, and not just taking a view from another madhab, totally doing it the way all the madahib that we know, right? Like extreme positions are being taken in the name of maslaha, what is good for common good, what is the maqasid, the goals of Sharia, but basically it's dismantling our structures. And alhamdulillah, we have enough ulama of the traditionalists and there to defend that position. But some of those things make it into the general public, it's a disservice to them as well. Wallahu ta'ala alam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding and tawfiq and preserve us. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.